Thanks.
All right. So first of all, thank you for being here tonight. Welcome to Apogee Women. And I all day long can read a bio to these women, and but I'd like for you to just tell us who you are and tell us a little bit about your story.
Yeah, I'm Danisha, aka Dr. Keating. I went and got a cool name,
Mhm.
but I tell my story in a unique way on social media because I'm a former foster youth and I was the guardian of five of my siblings. So I decided to self-publish some books to get my story out there and just have the ability to encourage other people because there's a lot of noise out there. So I want to make sure that, especially as a former foster youth, to be someone who shows them that it's not just about going and getting an education, but going and healing and being able to use our story for good and not just to become someone who feels like, one, maybe we're entitled to something, or two, just being really bitter about life. Because that tends to be what I see a lot of people gravitate toward, is just anger and being miserable. And so I wanted to start putting just a good story out there of just like, hey, you can overcome and you can find healing. And your story doesn't define who you are, it impacts you, but it doesn't have to be the thing that makes you stop moving forward. So I just do that online as well as just going and sharing my story in people's podcasts or in events and being able to write about that in different formats. Sometimes I do podcasts, sometimes I do my own show, and then writing a story in a book or a blog, and being able just to try to be an encouragement to others.
So, man, that first of all, I
It's a
love the
lot.
idea of not letting something just drag you down and be a victim to it.
Yeah.
But tell us a little bit more. You said you were the caregiver for five of your siblings. Tell us a little
Yeah.
bit more about that, because I have five kids and they weren't my
It's a
siblings, and
lot.
that was a challenge in itself. So,
I was 24 years old. And it's actually 10 years ago, I got a call from one of my brothers and he's like, hey, I need a place to stay for the night. And he had just turned 18. And I'm like, sure, you can come live in my house with me. But I had been renting a room in a house that was just all girls. And before that, I had struggled with homelessness and I was moving a bunch. So I moved probably about 33 times from 18 to 24. So then I finally got like some stability and I was like, cool, finally, renting a room that's a little more stable. And then he had called me and he's like, hey, I need a place to stay just to crash for the night. And then it ended up him being like, no, I need to move in. So I was like, oh, that's great. Like, we're going to have to find an apartment. I can't stay here because it's an all girl house. So we ended up getting an apartment. And about a month or two later, another brother called me and he was 19 and said, I need a place to stay. Yeah, I'm running away. And I'm like, what? You're 19. You're not technically running away. You're just going to go out and be an adult now. And then 3 months after that, I got a call from a church that my family was attending. And they said, you need to come get the three youngest or CPS will. And at 24 years old, I took in and became the legal guardian of my 12-year-old brother, 14-year-old sister, and 15-year-old brother. And they moved into my one bedroom, one bathroom, 500 square foot apartment with my other two brothers. So we went from very slowly a party of three to a party of six within just a few months. And that was a challenge because being 24 years old, most of my friends who did have kids, they were really young. And then I was the guardian of teenagers. And being, still 24, I was trying to figure out life and trying to like get my goals going. And I was still in school and trying to finish up my bachelor's and feeling like it was crazy and chaotic because it was just not the norm for a 24-year-old to do that. But it definitely made me start getting very serious about some things and like with dating as well as like just school being like, nope, I can't make those kind of mistakes. Like I gotta go. I gotta do things. I gotta get a big kid job. I can't goof around. And I think it made me a little bit more serious and in a sense of like no games at all. Like you can't play softball on Sundays. You can't go out and, have a drink with your friends. Like you're gonna have to like 24/7 just be about family. And it was just a different shift of the people that I was hanging around, which was a pretty significant shift for what I was living. It was just all my friends were in college. And then suddenly it was like, I can't just focus on school. Like I got to focus on kids and their goals. And that it just became very a lot overnight.
I imagine, I can think back to being 24 years old and wrapping up with college, and the responsibility of just yourself is its own traumatic thing, but much less caring for five other human beings. And the idea of okay, now I have to focus in on school and I have to focus in on responsibilities. How did you not lose yourself in that process?
People who were my community really came around me. A lot of older adults were just like, girl, you gotta, like, you're gonna have to work hard. But I think really focusing on school and like finding some things that I could do along the way, like reading or journaling, it did help me not feel like I was losing complete control. But there was a lot of shifting happening. So I did lose a lot of friends because they were just like, well, that's not my stress. And I don't know how you're doing that. And I tried not to tell people how I felt because I never wanted it to come back to my siblings or sound like I was complaining about the situation. Because that was something else. People had been like, hey, be very mindful of what you talk about when you talk about it. And I was like, okay. And then I learned that there were some people in my life at that point who were not using that information for good. And so I had to like back up a little bit, but I noticed people started distancing themselves. So I had to find other outlets. And it really did become about school at that point because I was like, I have a very short window to try to get out of poverty because I didn't make that much money at that point. Take home, I think I made about 18,000, and that's not a lot for a family of six. So it was kind of like I had to like grind and go. Like it was go time for me. And it was hard because that meant a lot of shifting. I didn't have the same friends that I did the year before taking my siblings in. And I would see that. Like I wasn't getting as many invitations to things. So I had to kind of get creative of like, okay, what can I do? I can play my guitar. That's not going to cost me anything. I can journal and start writing things because that's not going to cost anything if I just get a little notebook and start writing in it. So I had to find little things that I could be creative with. And I think really my outlet became doing worship music at church and playing guitar and then writing out how I was feeling in just different ways.
I think community is a huge thing, just in terms of
Yeah.
support. But
Yeah.
if you have people in your community that are actively working against you, and I can only imagine growing up in the foster system and in dealing with child protective services, and that there are people that feel like they're out to get you. So I imagine that there is a whole lot of I have to protect myself as well
Yeah.
as, raise these kids as well.
It definitely, and that's still something that I've had to work through that fear of foster care and CPS because surprise, surprise, like it doesn't get better when you get older. And now I have my own daughter who's 2.5, but with my siblings, because they were so actively involved, I felt like my life was like really opened. A lot of that they looked through my finances. They would drop by my apartment and look through my apartment and be like, oh, we're gonna look in your car to make sure you're not like hiding anything. And it like they looked at my driving record and like they looked at everything. So it was a different type of exposure versus when I was in it myself. I think I realized a lot of as a foster care youth in the system, it felt like people were doing things to me just to destroy my life versus being on the other side. It was like, oh, some people are trying to protect me versus or my siblings or a foster youth, but there were still some people who just didn't care. And that was what I think made the system so difficult to deal with, was that it was like, okay, I should have this resource available for my siblings, but then they'd say, nope, no, there's no way you can get this, and them not trying to help guide me through. And then years later finding out, like, if I had talked to this other person, I would have been able to maybe get that resource. So there were some people actively trying, but you do pick up that narrative of like everyone's out to get me, and that's not actually truth. So we have to speak into that lie and say like, hey, no, not everyone's out to get you. There are some bad people out there, but the majority of them actually want to help. It's just about who you talk to and connect with and being willing to not take no for an answer. And that was really hard for me, is because I'd go 5 6 numbers deep and keep getting no's. You're just like, I'm going to stop asking for help at this point.
Well, I imagine you get a little jaded with being told no. And
Yeah.
it's such a big thing. It's not you're not asking for simple things. It's and how did you persevere through that? I think there's a lot of resiliency that comes from that, but how did you
Yeah.
persevere from being told no for something so important?
I think for me, there were certain things I would let go of and be like, I'm done trying with this. Like county resources in my state are very different. I found after talking to a couple different people who were in the system and foster parents who used the system, they would help kind of fill in the gap of what I wasn't being told. So when they were saying like, "Hey, we've never seen someone who's had guardianship of their siblings or a family member get this resource," that's when I knew I needed to stop trying to run down this resource that they had for me. But I think there's a moment too, and I tell my husband about this a lot, where we sit back and I'm like, I don't know how I made it outside of community and God. Like those are the two things that, like, those were grounded. Is like if someone else has that resource, maybe it's not through the county, it's maybe through somebody else. But there was so many times that it was like I should have had that as a resource. I should have actually gotten like a monthly stipend every month for each kid, and I didn't. But when someone else is like, I've never seen someone get this, I'm like, I don't have time to keep tracking this thing down to try to just have a win. So I need to try to figure it out elsewhere. And usually what that meant was it was time to change the job that I was at. It was time to get my bachelor's degree done, even though that took me 8 years to get done due to some of the challenges, as well as taking in my siblings and then not focusing on school. It shifted me back to be like, okay, this is the way out for me. It's not going to be through a county resource that's limited. It's not going to be through a county resource that's not for me. I'm not going to keep trying to fight this down if it's not going to actually, like, it's going to take more time and effort and energy just to get it. When you do the calculations, you're like, oh, that was a lot of space and time and energy I wasted when I could have plugged it in over here. So I had to really sit with a couple people I trusted and just said, like, look, am I chasing this down just to get the win, or is this something that I should pursue? And they're like, I think you should stop trying, or they'd say like, I think you need to continue pursuing this. And that's kind of how I had to use that guide, because it is exhausting to get told no over and over and over again when you see so many other people winning and getting those yeses. And I think that the biggest misconception within foster care is that anyone who goes through a system with CPS, that they are labeled as foster care. It's not the case. If they're not in a foster parent home, that family member who takes the kids in may not actually qualify for any of the services. But then the foster youth who actually is kind of in the foster care system but not, they don't qualify for any resources. So it becomes a thing that you have to make that decision, like, is it worth chasing this down, or would my energy, effort and time be better going elsewhere? And you have to then start to like look at the rejection and be like, it's not me as a person. They're just looking at a file number at this point. They're just looking at an application. They don't actually know who I am. So I'm either going to have to make a decision to let this be the thing that takes me out, or just kind of like just pray that someday you can make a difference to try to help others get that resource. So that's my hope, is by telling my story, is that people can use that as a good example to be like, this is why this is so desperately needed for other families.
How did you begin to trust people again after experiencing this instability in the system?
That's a hard question. I think over time, it's also recognizing patterns of people. I still struggle with it with friends today, where it's just like, I don't know if someone's really wanting to be my friend because they want to be my friend, or if they're like, oh, I see that you talk to so and so, or like, oh, you're doing all these really cool things, I want to be a part of that. So sometimes I have to like step back and just be like, okay, let's trust them at their word. Instead of thinking that they have some thing behind it, I have to, hope that this person is good. I've had to ask other people just their opinion and be like, I need you to be honest with me. Like, is this a good person, or is this someone that would be not great toward me? But trusting, it's little by little, and it's, you don't jump into every friendship or relationship the same way. You would actually come in with caution. You don't tell all of the details of your story to people just because they're a friend and they're there. Sometimes that means you have to hold off for a couple years before you're like, hey, this is what I've experienced. I mean, mine's kind of out there because I put it out there, but now it's like I have to learn to take people at their word and hope that they are going to do what they say they're going to do until they give me reason not to see that as who they are, which is harder to do, but I'm trying, because I think sometimes I could come in really hard and be like, everyone's shady
Yeah.
versus being like, you know what? let me give them a chance. Let me see who they are. But there are some red flags that are bad. Like, I mean, as soon as some of those would be like someone knows a little bit about you and they start to use it against you. That's the person that you're going to walk away from immediately. If someone, seems like the only time they hang out with you is if you pay for everything, that's not a good friendship. A friendship goes both ways. And so that's where you give and take a little bit. Is it always you following up with that person? Is it always you extending the invitations? That might mean that person's not interested. So if you can find someone who's going to give and take, it helps build a healthy relationship versus, you don't want to come in either and be like, well, prove yourself to me right away. And they're probably going to be like, that's a little weird. Like, you're coming off a little strong. I'm like, I have to wait to see if they are who they are. And that comes with time sometimes.
Yeah, I think there's a balance with that because I know I tend to trust people very deeply. Like I've gotten burned a few times with that, and it's finding
Yeah.
that line of okay, I also want to still be me and love
Yeah.
people, and
Hmm.
and then cautioning and protecting yourself through that process as well.
I'm like best friends with everybody right off the bat. Like I really have. And that's where I kind of like, ooh, I need to watch a little bit. Just, trust them at their word. But, it is the heartbreak has always been, well, I didn't know we were good friends. Like I just thought I knew you. And I'm like, oh, my heart hurt because I really thought we like bonded. And so this is also where too, like I've had to be cautious with my story is there's this thing called trauma bonding where two people who have experienced trauma, that's what the friendship is based on. And literally like, oh, this is what I went through. And like I went through is like, oh my gosh, we're like best friends. Like, oh my gosh, we understand each other. But if that's the only thing you talk about all the time, that's not a friendship. That's not a hobby. Our trauma is not our hobby. So we have to be the person to kind of step back and say, like, do we have other interests together? Can we go on a hike? Can we go out to dinner? Can we not talk about the trauma? Or is it always that conversation? Because that's a trauma bonding experience. That's not actually a deep friendship. But I am the person who's just like, oh, I think we're like gonna be like really good friends. And so I have gotten hurt because I want to trust people and take them at their word. But not everybody feels the same way back. So sometimes I have to like step back and just be like, okay, am I the one always texting them and asking how they're doing? Or am I always the one calling and inviting them places and I'm not receiving that back? Like, okay, I need to pace myself. Because again, I would love to be best friends with everybody, but that's just not a reality. So sometimes I think that comes off a little strong. But I've had to be careful of that trauma bonding friendship.
Absolutely. We have a question from Holly.
Yeah.
Oh, can you hear me?
We
Yeah.
can.
Hi.
Yeah, okay. Well, thank you for being here. I was just reading up on your story before you came in. I have one quick question. Have you read the,
Oh, you just muted yourself, Holly.
have you read Widen the Window, Dr. Elizabeth Stanley?
No, I haven't.
Oh no. Okay, you need to write that down because I think you'll really enjoy it. But anyway, I'm reading and it's a trauma book, so it was
Love
making me
it.
think of this. So, but I have a question. So my sister works in special education, and I homeschool my kids, and we have a lot of conversations. I used to work as a nurse practitioner in pediatrics, and one conversation we have often is accountability because she sees a group of children in and out of foster care or not in great homes. And one thing we constantly grapple with is this accountability of how to keep parents accountable when it's not quite they're not quite DHS worthy, meaning they're not going to be taken and removed from the home.
Mm.
And for context, I live in Maine. Maine actually has a very poor we have a like double the rate of child what's the term they use
Double
it's
the amount of foster care youth compared to the population.
yes, and
Yeah.
maltreatment, double the rates
Mm,
of
okay.
maltreatment, so it's
Yeah.
a pretty heavy thing in my state, unfortunately. And we constantly grapple with this idea of like accountability for parents. And I'm just curious your thoughts on that as someone who was in the
Yeah.
foster care system. And now with what you do for your work,
Yeah.
what is your thoughts on like, how do we keep parents accountable, and you don't want to punish parents. Like, I don't know how with your
Right.
history, and it's like, we don't want to punish these families because then we don't want them to come on to the children, right? But
Yeah.
it's a really fine line. So I'm just really interested, what your thoughts are on that. And what is that work that you do, is how to, like,
It is. Yeah.
working with families who are either their child is being threatened to be taken by CPS, or we call it DHS here. But I know that's a deep question, but as I was
It is.
reading
It's a good
your
one though.
story,
Yeah.
yeah, I was reading your
Yeah.
story, and it's something my sister and I talk about frequently. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So I did grow up in poverty. A big part of the reason that I was taken was because of neglect. And neglect is not when, there's misconceptions that people are like, neglect is due to drug abuse. Most of the reasons that foster youth are put into foster care, it's 63% across the US, is actually because of neglect due to things like poverty related issues, not having childcare, not having like clean clothes or food. It is so hard to sit with a family, and really it comes down to, I think, lack of community is the reason that their kid actually got taken away. But there is a thing called depression that actually can happen, and sometimes with families, that when I've talked to the former foster youth, it's like, what did you see in your parent? And they were like, they just stopped trying. They had a lack of trying, because there is a huge issue where it's like one bio parent will have their kids taken away, and it had nothing to do with drugs, it had to do with neglect. The reason that they couldn't get the resources was a situation like when I took my siblings in, is that we didn't qualify for the resources because maybe we made a little bit too much money, or because they determined like there was something in the file and there was an error, or not having a computer to put the application in, so you have to take the day off of work to get in to do it at the office. Then you have to have an appointment at the office. And there's a lot of, I think, steps for something that should be very small and simple. If someone needs food stamps, they should be able to apply, they verify the information, and they give it to them. It should not be something that takes weeks at a time to get qualified for, and then you have to jump through another 5 hoops just to get the card to come in the mail. So that is a difference of like, that might be where I feel community really comes in and steps up, is like, look, you're not getting these resources with the county. When I had my siblings with me, I should have gotten the same stipend that a foster parent got. They did not give that to me because it was guardianship, not foster care. So I got $680 in monthly stipends for food stamps. If for my state, they call it like cash aid or something like that, and food stamps or whatever. But they dwindled that down when I made a little bit more. So each month I had to verify what I was making. That's a lot of work when it doesn't really change month to month. But then the issue was the aggression of the county worker with me, where it was like, I went in and I was like, here's the verification. I know we have the same last name. And it was like, well, now we have to re-verify that you're not the parent. I know people who are grandparents who take them in, aunts and uncles who take them in, but even bio families, it's like, well, I don't have that birth certificate, I lost it somewhere. And it's just a hoop after a hoop after a hoop. Some of it I understand, but there are a lot of situations where it's like, that does hone in on, like, I was more depressed, even though I wasn't on medication at that point. I was having more fear of just opening my door because police and CPS were there. And there were moments that I'm like, this isn't worth it anymore. I'm fighting so hard to try to get help, and I'm being ridiculed, mocked by people, being told that I just need to get my crap together. Like, in other words, they said really bad things besides that, but like, it's discouraging. And so there are going to be people who we meet that we see that they just need people to come around them and show them that life is worth living again, because most of these families are doing it by themselves. They might not have grandparents around. My parents, we were like 2-3 hours away from my grandparents, but then there was other things in my situation of physical abuse and other abuses that was taking place, that was why we were removed, but then we were put right back in. So it is heartbreaking to hear when a parent's just like, I just don't care anymore. And I have to get down to the question of why. And then when we really see that a lot of these families don't have like a real community, that's where it's even more heartbreaking. Most of the families that I've talked to, they were not a part of a church. They were not a part of any type of schooling. So they went to school, but they didn't really like do extracurriculars after school. So the kids would just go to school and come home. And they relied on the like after school lunch program or whatever else program was available, but not every state has that implemented. So if we can show up to be the community, invite those moms over, invite those dads over, invite those kids over, even if that parent is struggling emotionally, we can show them that we are going to show up for them, because that's what's going to make the biggest difference is community. We used to live in villages. We used to live in big communities, and it's like, why is this generation the last 20 years really struggling with CPS and DHS or foster care or depression because we're not in community? It's like the answer comes down to community. So we have to try to not judge and be like, well, aren't you scared of CPS? It becomes it's like your job at that point where you're just like, they're at my door every other day. That doesn't even matter anymore. I get so many times where they call me and they want to do a wellness check, and you just get used to their presence, which is, it doesn't make it okay, but it is something that it's like, what is the deeper rooted issue that's happening? It's probably not that it's not the fear anymore, but it's more of just like, they're just like, I don't know what else to do. I'm doing everything that I can. And I think that that's where my mom got to, where she was just like, I have no help, I have no resources, I have no people. So why don't they take them? And even said, like, you can take them from us. And that didn't happen right away, but that happened 5 months later, and it got worse because of that. And the thing that I noticed that she did not have was she did not have a real community of people, one, loving her, but also calling her out and helping her get to the point of being able to be sustainable by herself.
Did that answer your question, Holly?
Yes, thank you. It's a long, like, I get why it's such a long, deep answer. So it
It
gave me a
is.
lot to think about, because it's not a simple answer.
No.
It's just
Yeah.
yeah, it's really
It's
interesting.
very
Thank you. Yeah.
it's hard because it's very nuanced too. Not every single one foster youth is taken away for the same reasons. They say 63% is for neglect, but neglect can be a lot of different things. And then, the lower number is like 13% is for drug use, but then there's also a number for mental health issues. And people are like, well, because the drug use, it's like, no, it's just those are separated issues. But the sometimes it is multiple things at once, but those are different reasons for people to get taken away, and it's not always just because the person just didn't care. It usually that's not even the root issue. It's rooted way worse. And sometimes it is that the family had experienced child, like they were foster youth themselves. So they're like, this is all we know. So if we can be the community, I think we would see a huge difference if we saw more people get involved and be like, hey, I got you. I got dinner. Come over to my house on Tuesday nights. And this other person's like, come over to my house on Thursdays. I got you. Hey, I'm going to come over and clean your house. We do this for every one of our friends. But when it comes to someone who we have found out is struggling, we're like, well, that's their problem. They need to fix that. And I've been on the receiving end of that, where people backed away versus got involved with me. And that was really hard to see. Was when I needed people the most, that was when they ran away.
Well, if you're in a state where you don't have the community, and then the depression sets in, and let's just say it's these families that it's neglect due to poverty, because I know that there's all the reasons, right? Um, how do I step outside of myself? Because I know there's days
Mm,
where, I'm not in that, and it's hard to create community.
yeah.
I can only imagine that it's hard to create a community when, first of all, I don't know how. Second of all, a
Yeah.
big thing that you just said is people step away from, oh, that's not my problem. And then maybe well, I don't know how to ask for help because pride
Mm,
gets in the way. You know, it's it seems like this ever-ending process of,
it
unless
is. Yeah.
someone is in trouble, like how do these people find this out? Like how do we fix this?
I think it is really trying to encourage everyone that we're around. Even like, I live in a commuter state, I live in California, so people don't want to drive more than 20 minutes. It's just true. And that's where, a lot of the people that I know are always really far away. I could encourage anyone that I know, like, internet makes it so easy for us to reach people. So it's like, it's really sweet because there's I know someone in New York and then another person in Florida, and someone connected me to somebody else and was like, hey, you took your siblings and this other person did too. And I said, please give me their number because I want to reach out to them. and I reach out and I say, hey, can I Uber or DoorDash you food? We are in a time where it's like we have the ability to reach people that are thousands of miles away from us, that sometimes just sitting and asking that question is, what night can I provide you food? We might not know all of the things going on, but we can step in and just say, hey, this week we're going to partner with this church or this county and say like, hey, who can we send dinner to a family who might be struggling? Where is the local shelter that we could decide to come together as a community and cover the cost for the food that night? What shelter that can we come to drop off clothes and fold them with you guys? Those are things that are in very real time, really helpful to people. But sometimes we don't want to get outside of our own schedules. And it's hard because we're all busy, that it's like, well, I have my kids and I have my household, and it's hard to go and step out. But it is so much better to watch. And the thing that always comes to mind is it's called Possum Trot. They did The Sound of Hope. I believe it's called The Sound of Hope, but it is about a town that took in all of the foster youth who were not getting adopted out. In the end, that community adopted 75 foster youth. And when they called the county, like, hey, is there anybody else that needs adoption, being to be adopted? They were like, there's no more kids. Like, all of these kids have been cleared from the system that need to be adopted. And now here's also how we're helping families keep their children. So it is that thing where it's like, it's doable, but do we know where to go? And I always will say, like, call your county and not like say like, here's more backpacks, because I think a lot of places do backpacks and stuff like that, but like, call the county and say, hey, what schools are you guys connected to with that's helping families that are struggling? We want to adopt a family for Christmas. Christmas is going to be coming up in December. So what if we start reaching to those schools now and say, hey, do you guys have a list of families who are maybe struggling, or maybe is there a family you guys can think of in the community that we can sponsor a Christmas for? Is there a family that you know of who is struggling financially that we can pay rent to, so that they don't have to jump through the hoops of the county, that we just go and pay their electricity bill and their phone bill? I've heard crazy stories too of like people calling play like apartment complexes and just be like, hey, who's delayed on their rent? Can we pay it? And they're just like, what? And I'm like, that's how crazy it is to be able to be connected by simply doing a Google search. So if it's in your community, I would always look at that. I was always delayed on my rent. I was always delayed on my bills. And I know sometimes we're like, well, what if they go and buy drugs and this and that? I'm like, look, you can literally call the complex and be like, where can we make the church the checkout to you? You could also get with a local church and see how they're helping the communities, because they're going to know if that person attends their community or not. Most of the churches that I know are connected to the apartment complexes, but also the city's support programs for like the homelessness population. And a lot of them will work with families that are on the poverty spectrum and be able to reach out and say like, well, we have a few families who are struggling this month with rent or food, or there's this food bank that needs, you know, donations for food and or groceries, and we're able to just go and do that. And sometimes it's about just getting to our neighbor's house and knocking on the door, even if they're not struggling, and just be like, hey, come over for dinner on Thursday. Because you never know, like they might not be struggling financially, they might just be struggling emotionally. And so if we can get back to that of like opening our communities up, I do think less people would struggle with not just mental health issues, but with things like foster care and DHS.
I love it. Yeah, and we're Apogee is opening schools all over the United States right now.
I
So
love
that
that.
would definitely be something that we look into as an organization of how
Yeah.
do we reach out, and I think that the big thing for me is where if I'm going to donate, is my money actually going to these people that need the help, and not, I want
Right.
to know where my money is going,
Absolutely.
and for the sake of time, because like you said, a lot of us are really busy.
Yeah.
And if you don't have the time to go and volunteer somewhere, how can you, um, you know,
Yeah.
make sure
If
your
you
dollars. Go ahead.
I love that question, because I think that that's like where my heart always goes, is like, I have worked with counties and they have collected things and then they sit in a back room for 6 months. Not a fan of that. So with churches, if they're partnered with someone on the check or the donation, you can put a note and say, please make it go towards this this pocket, and they have to legally put it toward that pocket. There's also organizations across the US, and there's a ton of them. Foster the Family is one of them. I think I'm trying to think of another one. Is like not Charlie's Angels. Maybe it is the Charlie's Angels. I will get them for you
Yeah,
guys.
definitely.
So you guys can start looking at them. It's Charlotte's Angels, but there are organizations across the US that are actually helping with foster care and with families who are struggling directly. Mobile Hope is another one. They help with the homeless population, but specific to foster care. Because when they surveyed the homeless population, 50% of them said that at some point they had dealt with the foster care system. So we're seeing this funnel from foster care to homelessness and drug use and jails and all of these other things, because no one is coming in and kind of disrupting the pattern and saying like, hey, we're here for you. But these programs are available. And if you say, hey, I would love for this to go toward a family, and that's what they do, they'll make sure that it goes towards that, because legally they have to as a 501c3. So that's the beauty of it, is when they say, yes, we work with this particular organization locally, this is how we can do it. You're going to see a rapid fire happen, especially because you guys are in these different states across the US. You're going to see like 1 to 2 people, 5 people as a small little group. That's not bad. That's actually pretty strong and mighty. You don't need 100 people giving $1 each. Sometimes it's, hey, we have $50 we'd like to donate to give to dinner for a family, and that organization can help point you in the right direction.
Love it. That's yeah, definitely send us
I'll
the
send you a bunch of stuff.
and that way I can spread it out
Yeah,
to these
absolutely.
the different apogees that are opening for sure. When did you realize that you were breaking these generational cycles, not just by surviving, but rewriting your story?
It took me a while because I was in survival mode for so long. I think it was after I started researching my doctoral research. So for my PhD, my dissertation was on foster care support programs for community colleges, and I started seeing all the statistics of what a foster youth goes through, and I was like, oh, okay, only 50% graduate high school, 3 to 4% graduate with an associate's or a bachelor's, 1% with a master's. And I did all of that. And I just kind of sat back and I was like, okay. But then it was different friends in my life that were older who were just like, Denisha, I know that this is really hard, but you're breaking the pattern of what your family is doing. You might not see it yet, you might not understand it yet, but this is something that you're breaking. And then the last I would say 2 or 3 years, I've really understood like, okay, I've broken some cycles, but I started writing my newest book, Taking My Voice Back, Healing What Broke Me. And I started writing down because, like, you can see your financial growth, you see your academic growth, you see your friendship growth. It's really hard to see that you've emotionally grown. And so when I started to write some things out, it's kind of funny because I was like, oh, I'm actually kind of funny when I'm writing. Like, this is actually kind of like, I'm pretty good at these jokes. But then I sat back and was like, wow, I've really grown emotionally, because sometimes it's hard to weight that of like, where have I been with healing? How broke, like just talking about some stuff was difficult 3, 4 years ago versus now. When I share my story, I'm like, I know the truth of my story. People aren't going to like it. People aren't going to like that the system fails. People aren't going to like that I got back up and did some crazy, amazing things. People are going to hate on me for that. They do often, but I'm not going to stop because of that person. Versus 10 years ago, I would have been like, oh, they must be trying to tell me something. It's like, no, but there was something my pastor said years ago. It's probably like 15 years ago. So it was way before I took my siblings in. But he said, he was talking about legacy, and he's like, if you want to change your family, it should be to the point of that generational thing being broken so well that when someone looks at the lineage of your family, they go, wait, what happened here? How did that person change from their family was on the pattern of alcoholism, abuse, all of these crazy things? What did that person do? I want to look into that, magnify that. Who is that person? Let's look at them, because from there on, that all was done. And I'm like, that's what I want to leave. And so some of the things, with especially CPS, I didn't realize this until last year, is CPS runs on my mom's side about 3 to 4 generations back. On my dad's side, it's 3 generations. And foster care has always kind of been involved. And my poverty has been, I don't know how many levels back. It is insane. Like there really isn't a lot of people who've deviated from that. But it wasn't just financial poverty. A lot of it was emotional and mental poverty, where it was like they had this, like, even though I have this, I got to hoard everything. And even though I have this, I got to blow it all before I even do anything good with it. And it's just like you kind of sit back and you're like, oh, this is not a good thing. Like there's more than just a situational thing that we go through. Sometimes it is like overeating. Sometimes it's not an addiction to alcohol, but alcohol is being an alcoholic, but it's more of food. And those things where it's like we gorge overindulge in that and we're just like, ugh, like those things, those can run rapid in a really bad way. And for me, it was a lot of things having to be broken. But I think the pattern of self sabotage is a big one. Watching how my parents both were master manipulators and liars, which made me go like the opposite of just like, I got to tell the truth and nothing but the truth. And like, always like, I can't even hold a secret of a birthday party because I don't want to be a liar. And it's like, that's an okay secret to hold. But those are things that I recognized we have to, though I didn't realize just how much I had come until September of 2024 when I was writing this book. And I was like, oh, that's a big stretch because I kept feeling like I was still 15 sometimes and I'm 35. So I'm like, that's kind of not a great feeling to have when you're sitting there like, have I grown? I don't know. But now I'm like, oh, I really have. And there's still things that impact me and hurt, but it's not as bad as it used to be. Like even Mother's Day, sometimes, Mother's Day can be very tricky. But Mother's Day this year, it just felt joyful and I was excited about it versus being in my bed for 3 days before crying my eyes out like I've done every year. So it's like those little moments of healing. I'm like, oh, that's a big moment. And maybe next year I feel it, but maybe not. I would rather not, just because it can be very heavy when we're in that season. But I'm learning to take those seasons as not setbacks, but just a deeper healing. And that's a better way to look at it for me, because I think sometimes I'm like, oh no, I'm feeling sad over this. I'm backtracking. It's like, no, 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 no. You're going to heal deeper in a deeper way with this.
Ladies, if you have questions, please raise your hands. I feel like I'm dominating Dr. Danisha right now, but you are changing generations just by, having your siblings and taking that on
Yeah.
and not falling victim to your circumstance and allowing this to continue to flow through you and your family.
Mm,
And that's a big thing inside of Apogee is, where it's education for the whole family.
yeah.
And, when I first started with Apogee, I was like, no way am I going to homeschool my child and do, and I'm like,
Right.
four of my five kids all went through the public school system. And when I started to understand that the biggest education they've gotten is from me,
Yeah.
and that's your gift that you gave to your siblings. And that's the gift that you're giving your daughter is, at not letting them see you defined by this. And of course we all have hard days. And I love the fact that you just celebrated the win of, hey, this was a joyful Mother's Day for you and not
Yeah.
letting it set you back. That's awesome.
I think one of the things that, a lot of us as parents will say, like, I want my kids to stand on, my shoulders and go. And that same understanding is for my siblings too, is that I wanted to be the foundation they got to stand on. So a part of that isn't like, well, I'm going to knock it just up a notch. I was like, I want to go so far that they have to be like, I can go that far too. And I went through I'm going to say homeschooled because I was not really homeschooled. I was like Jerry Springer, like I Love Lucy homeschooled, where it was just TV. Please don't do that to your kids. But I taught myself how to read at 9, and one of the biggest hurdles of reading at 9 was I had just memorized. And so I got to a point where I was like, I really love learning. I really want to learn. So I want to challenge myself. But then I didn't go to a public school until high school. And when I got there, it was a very big culture shock. Like I learned a lot only because that was really the first time I learned. But when I look at my job to my daughter, who's 2.5, and to my siblings, is to show that, like, look, life is going to beat you down. Life is going to suck sometimes, no matter how much you work. But then there's going to be other times that people are going to honor that with you. So if you can be a good person, people are going to want to do right by you for the majority of the people. There's going to be people who come in and sabotage you. You can't control that, but you don't have to be around it. So my job is to go so far that my foundation for where my kids stand, my siblings and my daughter, that it is a higher level if they choose to go. But the first thing that they need to be is a good human, because all the other stuff there, that doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter what the job is at the end of the day, as long as it is decent and it's not hurting people, as long as it's legal, and as long as it's honoring Christ. Like, nothing else matters. The only thing I can teach my kid is to be a good human and to love Jesus. Everything else is secondary. Those two things, if I don't do those two things as a sister and a parent, I did it wrong. And I heard that from another gentleman who, him and his wife were talking, and they were, I think at that point, they were like 70. And they were like, if that's what we teach our children and our grandchildren, we did it right. Even if all the other stuff, we didn't really get into. I'm like, can they read? Can they write? That's cool. But do they know who Jesus is? Do they know how to be a good human to people? Those are the things that actually matter above everything else. And that has always really stuck with me, because it's like those are the things that you really do learn in nature versus and nurture, not just one or the other. It's both. You have to see it and you have to experience it, and it comes, kind of secondhand for some of us.
Be a good human. Love it. All right, Suzanne.
Thank you so much for being here. I don't like to share my kid's story, but we've adopted two kids from foster care. And I don't get the opportunity to talk to a lot of adults that have gone through what my kids have gone through. And I guess the question is, I mean, everyone's story is different, but like, what one piece of advice would you give to a parent of kids that have adopted and not, I didn't go through the process of this. I mean, I've only lived it through my kids, who are now 9 and 11. They've been with us for 6 years. And because you don't see it every day in them, but there's times where you can tell that it's really heavy on them.
I think,
and like, where do
Go
I
ahead.
like, how do I help them? And like, it just, what's the best way to support them? I mean, I think we've been doing a pretty good job for 6 years, but as they get older, it gets harder because it gets further away from them. But it's heavy.
I think there's a big, and I'm going to get in trouble for saying this, but I'm going to say it, is that in the foster care community, in the adoption realm, a lot of people will sit here and be like, adoption is trauma, which it can take them from their bio family. But there is a lot of people who are like, it's a horrible thing to do, and it's not true. Like, it is something where it's like we are bringing them into our family. Their bio family still exists. So if you can have a relationship with that family and let them have a relationship with that family, they're going to get to know who their family is. Now, there is a hard reality, is that when they are adopted out, most of the time that door is closed, and that is definitely difficult. But the hardest part is that so many people in the community will be like, it's their trauma, and it's like, no, sometimes it's them being a teenager. Just because they have an attitude, or just because they didn't want to do their homework today, it may have nothing to do with what they experienced as a young person going through the system. Some of the most hardest traumas that I've had to, that didn't even make sense, but what we're going with it, because I have a doctor, I can make sentences up, right? Some of the hardest trauma that I've experienced was in my adulthood. It was having my daughter 6.5 weeks early, having a miscarriage. It wasn't what I experienced as a child. I'm so far past my experience as a teenager in the system and being with my parents. Like, I'm 35. The last time I was with my parents, I was 15. So that's 20 years. I've lived more years without my parents by my side than I have lived with them. So it very much is like, some of the things I went through were just how people were rude to me. But seeing that it's not about comparing, like, well, look, other people have it worse, they didn't get adopted. That's not the right route to go. But if you can give them stability of, maybe even if they want to have questions answered about their bio family, let them ask about it. Don't force it. Some parents are like, I'm always asking if they want to meet their family. And, and it's like, just let it go, because they might not want to. They might just be like, I don't remember them. I feel bad that I don't remember them. But each person is so different. But there is a huge issue, I feel like, that's happening currently, is where it's like, oh, you went through something, you have to speak about your trauma, you have to show that it's trauma, you have to be upset about it. And a lot of people I've talked to are like, I'm not upset about it. I understand why I was taken away. I understand why I was adopted out. For me, I'm like, look, I understand why I was put into foster care. Was I mad for a period of time? Absolutely. My younger siblings have said, like, I don't really remember our mom or our dad. Like, I remember our dad more, but I don't remember our mom. Like, we didn't live with them, and since we were 4 and 5 years old, and it's like that's a reality for them. But what has hurt them more was just bigger things in life, more things that were in their teenagers that were older, moving around a lot with me. That was hard for them because they're like, I want stability, and I'm like, I'm doing the best I can. But it really comes down to each person. If they want to meet their bio family, if it's safe to do that, I would encourage you to try, but also like be okay with them just being normal teenagers. Like that's totally normal that sometimes you're like, oh, yep, that's the trauma. But then there's sometimes where you're like, that's just being a normal teenager, not wanting to do the dishes, their room smelling. That's all about being a teenager. That's okay. That's not I've seen people do it. They're just like everything's trauma, and I'm like, that's actually not true. But that it really comes down to each kid is so different too. Is that one might want to meet their bio family while the other does not, and that's okay. That needs to be in their control when they're ready. My sister said the best statement I had ever learned is she said, I don't like walking into rooms with people who I feel that know my entire story without me telling them, and I want to be ready in my own time to say things. So maybe they're ready now, maybe they're not. Maybe they're 25, 26 being like, "Hey, can I know some things?" But I think the biggest thing I hear from a lot of people who are adopted is it really comes down when it's the medical history stuff. That's when they start to really ask questions. And then, once they turn 18, they're not. I think some of them have felt that they're not their family anymore, and that has been because that's how their family treated them. Was that once they turned 18, they're like, okay, adoption's over. Like, don't talk to us anymore. We raised you. You're good to go. Go away. That has been heartbreaking to hear from some adoptees, is that they have been treated like they were not family anymore. And that's just, sometimes I'm like, that wasn't childhood trauma. That was adult trauma, but that was heartbreaking to know that they've gone through that.
Great. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Hey, Sam and crew.
Hello.
Hi there.
Hello.
I totally agree with, am I unmuted? It says, okay,
Oh, you're
No,
good.
you're good.
I'm good. Okay. I totally agree with like the trauma pieces of, relying on that to kind of define who you are. And it seems
Yeah.
like you have not done that. So that is very cool and means a lot to me because I don't rely on my trauma a whole lot from when I was growing up. What
Yeah.
do you attribute that to, of just like looking forward, looking to what you have to come? Where did that come from?
I really do think it had to come from my faith, because there was a lot of people around me who were like, you know what, you do need to forgive and move on. Not forgive and have a relationship, because my parents were not good. They were still doing a lot of the same things, and so it was not healthy for me to have a relationship with them. But a lot of people were. There was a lot of anger and just I internally was it kind of like I had like a 5 panel committee in my head, which was really hard because it'd be like something would happen and it was like, whoa, and I would just hear all of these things to where I would get so overwhelmed, and then I would get very angry. So it was learning that I didn't have to live in that chaos of anger and confusion and sadness, that I there was something on the other side. So hearing that so many other people who would come from abusive situations had been able to be good human beings, I was like, okay, there has to be hope for me. Like, I mean, I was sitting with people who were like, I was abused when I was little, and then a drug addict when I was in my 20s, and then in my 30s I started to have a family, and in my 40s I started to deal with it. And I stepped back and I was like, I don't want to be 40 trying to deal with this. Like, I want to do this now because I'm tired of how it already feels. So I think because, one of it's been a harder thing for me is that I'm considered an empath, someone who feels what other people feel. I think that kind of did it in for me, was because it wasn't just like I had my own feelings, but then when I'd sit with people who were hurting in their 40s and 50s, I would then feel their weight. And I was like, oh, I don't want that too. I don't want to let it get to that part. But I also saw a pattern in my parents. This was, I started taking a psychology class in college. And it was verbatim what my family was in this like assignment, in this case study that we were looking at. And one of the things that they talked about was that generational things that were being passed down. And I'm like, I can't pass this down. And in order to not pass something down, you have to work through it. But it's taken this long from 19 to 35 to finally be like, okay, I'm not crazy because that hurt my feelings. I'm not crazy because that was a hard situation, but I don't have to let this rule everything that I do going forward or the way that I talk or act. And I think the exposure to people who were in their 40s and 50s dealing with that when I was 19 years old, I was like, okay, there has to be a better way. And a lot of them just told me, they were blunt. They're like, go to counseling, read your Bible, deal with it. Stop hiding from it because it's not going to get better if you keep pushing it off, which is what I was doing at that point. I was like, don't think about it. Nope, don't deal with it. Don't even try. Don't cry over it. Don't have emotion. They were just like, actually, you should go through the grieving cycle. I'm like, there's a grieving cycle? Like that, I don't like that. But my faith had a big part to do with that. And then being around people who were willing to be honest. Because again, like I talked to someone and I was sharing with her and she's like, Denisha, you figured that out in your 20s while I'm in my 70s trying to figure it out for the first time, and how much joy I've missed out on because I didn't want to let it go. I'm like, okay, now I'm going to go keep sharing because that's why I want so many people to see like healing can happen. This does not have to be the driving force of your life to be mad at the world. And that's kind of what we see around the world right now is everybody's a victim of something. And that is what people will live by and be like, I'm a victim. I'm a victim. And I'm like, I'm not a victim. Those things happened to me, but I am on this side of things too, where I understand that that is not what I'm going to project going forward. I'm not going to throw that out into the world. I'm not going to use it as an excuse to not move forward in my education or even in my friendships. Like that's the hardest thing to do. And sometimes I want to be like jaded. I'm not going to lie. Sometimes I'm like, I'd rather just be jaded and just be mad about everything. And I'm like, but then how I feel internally, I get panicky, I get more anxious, I get depressed, I get angry. And I'm like, I don't want to be that person in the world. There's enough of those people out there. There is not enough people being like joy and fun around, and not fake fun, but like real, like you sit with someone, you're like, I feel like I've known you forever. And you just know how to laugh. I want to be that person at 70. I'll be very funny and probably sit on a rocking chair and be weird, but it'll be fun. But I want to be that person when I'm older. I don't want to be the person who's, internally ugly and bitter.
I love that. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I think if from that we can just say we all have that thing, and we can let it define us, or we can work through it and not be the 70-year-old woman that is still dealing with it. And will there be pieces? Of course there will be. But I would, to quote you, rather be sitting in the rocking chair next to you, Dr. Denisha, spreading joy at the old folks home than sitting there complaining about what my life brought to me. Thank you so much for being here tonight.
Welcome.
My last question for you is, how can we support you best? Where can we find you, and how can we support you and what you're doing?
I want to add on real quick too before we end is one of the other things is that all of our bitterness and our like panic and anxiety and trauma that we have experienced, it actually impacts our body. And when we have seen from research, a lot of people have actually been able to connect back every health issue back to bitterness, anger, and trauma if we don't deal with it. So that's also another encouragement to be like, I don't want to have high cholesterol and all these other things happening to my body when I'm older, or inflammation. Start dealing with what you feel. And the best way for you guys to be able to support me, you guys can purchase my books online. You can go to Amazon and pick up both books, From Foster to PhD and Taking My Voice Back. You can follow me on all social media platforms. All of them have DR in the front of my name of, Dr. Danisha Keating, and then following along and always sharing the content that I have just helps reach to the right people who are especially foster youth who just feel like the world is telling them that they need to not move forward. That is actually a concept that they're being told right now is, we'll understand if you quit here today and just not try tomorrow. And I want to combat that with like, no, you gotta get back in the ring and you gotta try it again, because you're gonna be the one who wakes up to your choices tomorrow, not that person who just told you to quit. So if you guys can follow along and share, that would be fantastic.
All right. Again, thank you so much for being here tonight. I honor your time.
Thank you so much.
All right. We're going to keep these ladies on for a little debrief after. Thank you so much.